In reviewing the environmental impact statement, there are portions of it that I agree with, and there are portions of it that I disagree with, and so I'm just going to go over mostly the portions that I disagree with to give you my reasoning as to why I think there are some errors. So on page 36, section 4.2.2, the EIS states that it is unlikely that the loss of habitat resulting from the project construction will cause significant declines in the populations of any wildlife species currently using the property. And the EIS also says in the next few lines on page 36 and 37 that mobile wildlife species will be displaced temporarily during construction but are likely to return after construction is completed. So I'm going to go through a number of reasons why I feel this is inaccurate. I don't believe there's any scientific support presented for these statements. They're speculative, and I believe they're incorrect. In the sweeping conclusion that that significant population declines are unlikely in any species in the entire project site, I feel is just completely unjustified. So there are well over 1,000 species of forest-dependent animals, wildlife species, that breed on that site. Now, no one's done a survey of all the species. It would be logistically impossible to do so. But there are about between 80 and 90 species of vertebrates and approximately 1,500 species of invertebrates inhabiting that forest. And that's just common biology from oak and pine upland forests in the Pine Barrens. And we can provide all sorts of support for that the species diversity is at about that level. Now, few of the wildlife species on the site will escape the construction process. Most of the species, a few of them will manage to be able to move out of the way of the construction equipment as the site is stripped of trees, as the soils are ground up and redistributed and graded. But even those few that manage to move off the site, almost none will ever return after construction because the forest won't be there anymore. And these are forest species that are being displaced. Very few that will manage to get out of the way. They won't come back. They won't use a habitat of shaded ground interspersed with lawn grass. And the only thing that would ever come back would be a handful of rodents and backyard birds and other very familiar, common animals that we tend to see, running around lawns and neighborhoods. And even ones that require trees won't come back. Even perching birds and things like that won't come back, except for starlings and robins and a few species that would perch on the solar panels. Now, very few species that inhabit the forest have mobility in the face of forest clearing and grading activity. There are cryptic species, that means they're very well camouflaged. People operating the equipment won't see them, and you'll see photos of one prime example of that later in my report. There are fossorial animals between their burrowing animals. They'll be underground, they'll simply be crushed. Vertebrates like small snakes, salamanders, flying squirrels that live in tree cavities, shrews, moles, voles, owls. All of these creatures are in cavities and in logs and in crevices. They inhabit the soil, the leaf litter, the rotting stumps, tree cavities, and they simply won't be moving. They'll simply be crushed by the clearing. For more than 1,000 invertebrate animal species, their home ranges are so tiny. They live their whole lives in an area only a tiny portion of the size of this room. They're not capable of moving out of that 65 acres. They'll simply be destroyed. And so they can't escape the construction activity. None of these species can move successfully. They'll simply be destroyed.
Okay.
Now, a few animals can move, of course. Things like small woodpeckers or a gray squirrel, other small mammals that are not burrowing, some of the resident songbirds that haven't migrated away at the time, they'll fly away. Sure, they'll escape the construction process, and they'll attempt to settle in the surrounding habitat. Now, displaced animals almost always fare very poorly because the habitats that they enter, these common species, they enter these habitats in the surrounding area, and they're already occupied by other individuals, other gray squirrels, other cardinals, other woodpeckers. And those individuals that are already there are territorial. They're familiar with the resource distribution, where they have to purge, sleep, escape from predators, find food, and so they outcompete the displaced animals. And so the mobile common species, even though they move out of the way, they fare poorly, and eventually they don't survive very well, and eventually they disappear from the population. Now, there have been population biology studies for the last 75 years, ever since population biology became a popular thing to study in the 1950s. And this phenomenon has been studied very carefully. Animals flee disturbances like wildfires or whatever it might be, tree clearing, and the population density pops up in the surrounding area. Those density increases are short-lived, and because the animals cannot all compete in the same place, and because the animals that are already in those places are better competitors, eventually the numbers go back down to the densities that were found at the beginning, and the displaced animals, most of them disappear from the population. This is a fundamental principle of population biology with animal species, and this EIS, in making these sweeping statements that animals will move out of the way and be fine and come back, is just completely it's completely unsupported. Now, the EIS says that the forest has to be cleared between August 1st and March 15th to avoid impacts to bats, bald eagles, and migratory bird species. The EIS, they did a survey for the federal bat species of concern, didn't find them, so that the federal bat species is not an issue, probably doesn't inhabit the site. Bald eagles nest nearby, but I'll explain later why bald eagles are not a species of concern here because of the project. The bald eagle habitat is not going to be taken. And the migratory birds are protected from by timing restrictions. Migratory birds have to generally leave the site by the end of July, most of the adults anyway. Some of the juveniles are still there. But if the site is cleared between August 1st and March 15th, most of the migratory birds aren't there when that happens. Now, that doesn't mean that those migratory birds are going to do well. Those migratory birds are going to have left the site, they're going to come back the next spring, the forest will be gone, and they'll fare just like the other animals that were displaced. They'll try to settle someplace else. If those are common species with populations that are fairly robust, then those animals won't find unoccupied habitat, they won't be able to compete. But the problem is that most of the species on this site are not migratory birds. Most of the species, all of those species that I've already talked about, are resident species with tiny territories. They don't migrate, they can't move quickly. Many of them, when faced with noise and commotion, they freeze, they hide, they stay still, thinking that the elk is going to run past, or the herd of large animals is going to run past. Well, of course, the herd of large animals isn't running past, it's clearing and destroying the forest. So all those animals die. It's very simple. And we're not just clearing the forest. Remember, we're clearing the forest, we're grading the forest, we're destroying the root masses, the leaf litter, the organic material. So all the things living in all those different microhabitats are simply going to be destroyed. So there is a window between August 1st and approximately September 20th when those few species like squirrels and cardinals and things that can get up and move out of the way can escape the construction process. Those are about the only species that won't simply be wiped out by the construction process. The species that are resident animals that can get up and run away, walk away, fly away, that are there between August 1st and September, late September, about September 20th. They will go into the surrounding area, and most of them will fare very poorly and eventually die. So that's going on with the common species, right? There's a very high number in diversity of common wildlife species, or semi-common species. Many of them are unable to escape the construction process. If they're migratory species, when they return, they won't be able to utilize the altered site because the forest will be gone. There's a low probability that if they displace into a surrounding habitat that they can survive. Some species that return will not find suitable habitat on the site, the EIS says that some of the species will move and then return after the construction is finished. I mean, a forest species, if it returns to look for the forest won't be there. So that's a silly statement, really silly, that the species will come back after the construction process. Only a handful of species that live in the forest will come back and be able to live in a lawn with lots of large structures scattered around it and in it. And many of those species that are being displaced, moved, crushed, many of those species are in decline already throughout the region and throughout New Jersey. And so there's just no way to conclude that there's no significant population decline in any species. That's for all of the species. Now we're going to look at the rare species. The EIS states on page 40, section 4.3.2, that the forest habitat critical to wildlife will be cleared. We acknowledge that, right? But that rare species listed are highly mobile species and capable of moving to other sites in the area. I dispute this so strongly that there's nothing that I can dispute more strongly in my history as an animal biologist. Okay? There are 13 species listed by the EIS. Within the body of the EIS, there are 13 rare species listed. 5 of them are completely ignored by the discussion within the EIS. The EIS incorrectly concludes that no significant impact will occur to 6 of the 8 species that they do discuss. They do say that bald eagle and Cooper's hawk are not going to experience significant population impacts. I agree with that. Bald eagle and Cooper's hawks are species that used to be more rare. They're making a rebound. Their populations are expanding. And if there is any small impact to the loss of the forest habitat for Cooper's hawks, they will be able to occupy other habitats nearby because there are unoccupied habitats right now in the region for Cooper's hawks. Their population is expanding into unoccupied habitat. Bald eagles don't really use this forest patch. Bald eagles nest nearby near one of the lakes. They forage mostly in aquatic habitats near the lake. They also eat carrion on roadsides. They don't eat anything that's living in this forest. They don't perch in the forest very often. They don't really need this little patch of forest. Well, not little, 60 some acres. But for the bald eagle, that's a little patch that they're not really using. So I don't have a problem with bald eagle and with Cooper's hawk. How about all the other 11 species, though, that are mentioned in the EIS? 4 species are known to occur on-site or have critical habitat on-site based on the New Jersey natural heritage data that's presented in the EIS. 4 species are known to be present within 1 mile. And then there are 5 species listed as being associated with the habitat by the Ocean County Planning Board. And we can go through each of those. 2 are endangered, the bald eagle we've already discussed, and the red-shouldered hawk, which nests within 1 mile. 3 species are threatened, the barred owl, the northern pine snake, and the wood turtle. And the barred owl and the northern pine snake are either on-site or there is critical habitat for them on-site, and it was testified by the applicant that the northern pine snake is within 500 feet. And we'll get back to the northern pine snake later. The wood turtle is listed, is known from the stream corridors nearby, from some of the stream, they nest in stream corridors, but they forage extensively in the upland forest, and their home ranges are very large, and the wood turtle, given that it's known from very close by and that the stream corridors are contiguous with this forest, the wood turtle probably utilizes the site. Barred owls forage in forests, and while they nest, usually in wetland forests where there are large trees, because the forests and wetlands are generally older, they don't burn as often, they don't get logged as often, especially with maple forest. That's where the bigger trees are. That's where barred owls nest. They forage throughout the entire forest. Their foraging is not restricted to wetlands, and so the barred owls utilize this habitat. Barred owls' home ranges are enormous, and we know that they're close to the site, and that their home ranges are enormous, and they use this forest. Now, there are lots of species of special concern. The EIS talks about whippoorwills in its discussion. Whippoorwills breed on the site. They're a species of concern. Wood thrushes are listed very briefly in the EIS. They also breed on the site. I've heard them every time I drive down Reed Road and Bryantville Road during the breeding season. You can hear them. They're singing on the site. Box turtles are not mentioned except in the Ocean County Planning Board list, but this is perfect habitat for bog turtle. They're present in Collier's Mills. There's no barriers to their movement. They have to be here. Ground thrashers and broadwing hawk are very likely on the site breeding. No one's done a census. The applicant has not done a census for those species, even though they're listed by the Ocean County Planning Board as associated with this exact habitat type. Common nighthawk is fairly cryptic species, hard to detect. A census would need to be done. They're probably there. They're in Collier's Mills. Veery is a little bit less likely. It's listed by Ocean County, but it's not that prevalent in this part of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. It occurs, but it's perhaps not at the site. Brown thrasher is, again, in the area. It could be there. A survey would need to be done. So those are the only two, brown thrasher and veery, that might not be present on the site, based on my vast 30-year experience in the New Jersey. I'm all getting old. 30. Go back to 1979 when I started doing field studies. That's what, 36 years. This will be my 37th year of field survey work in the Pine Barrens. The only two species that may not be on this site, based on everything in the EIS, brown thrasher and veery, they may not be present there every year. But all the other species are present. So, this EIS alleviates concerns regarding the negative impacts to two species correctly, bald eagle and Cooper's hawk. The other 11 species, it misses the mark. Okay, I've already gone through every species. The species listed in purple here, wood thrush, whippoorwill, barred owl, northern pine snake, wood turtle, and red-shouldered hawk are not dealt with correctly by the EIS. And the species listed in blue, box turtle, brown thrasher, veery, common nighthawk, and broadwing hawk are completely ignored by the EIS. Completely. Okay. Now let's focus in on the rare species even a little bit more. The EIS indicates on page 40, 4.3.2, that the forest critical to wildlife will be cleared, but that, did I go the right way? Yes. But that rare species listed are highly mobile species and capable of moving to other sites in the area. This is absolutely wrong. There's no justification provided for that statement. It's just wrong. The two reptile species that occur on site, the northern pine snake and the box turtle, become immobile when they're startled. They don't move. They don't try to get out of the way. They hop. They freeze. And they use their camouflage. They're also highly cryptic, which means they're virtually invisible. And they can't possibly survive construction activity. Plus, the construction activity is most likely to occur between August 1st and March 15th. If it occurs any time after late September, these animals are underground, hibernating, or within a few feet of their hibernation dens, and they won't move, or they'll immediately duck their heads into their dens. And you'll see a photograph of that in a minute, and they will be simply crushed and destroyed. 8 of the other 9 species are declining rapidly region-wide, and they will lose breeding habitat as it is destroyed. And even if they are not there because of migration when the habitat gets destroyed, when they come back, the habitat won't be present and they'll experience significant population declines. So that's, now the reason I can say that is because many of the species are listed as special concern, and I'm going to tell you what the New Jersey DEP definition of special concern is. A species that warrants special attention because of inherent vulnerability to environmental deterioration or habitat modification that would result in it becoming threatened if conditions surrounding the species begin or continue to deteriorate. These are species that are already declining drastically throughout the state of New Jersey. Any loss of habitat is a significant decline. That's what that definition means. You can't say that if we run over a couple of box turtles, it doesn't matter. You can't make that conclusion. The very definition that box turtle is special concern means that if you lose their habitat, it's a significant loss of individuals in the population, and it's significant to the species decline. That's why they're special concern. They're not threatened yet. Threatened means now we're really in trouble. Endangered means you'll be lucky to bring them back. Okay, special concern species cannot simply move or switch to another site, even if the bog turtle could outrun the bulldozer. Okay? Where is it going to go? The population is declining. They're having trouble finding mates. They can't find appropriate habitat. They can't find appropriate resources. If they happen to go into another habitat that's already occupied by a box turtle that's barely eking out the resources that it needs, now 2 box turtles are competing for the same resources. One of them dies. The wood turtle is a threatened species in New Jersey. It's nearby in the stream corridors. This site is foraging habitat and dispersal habitat to reach other animals in the population, spread the genes, to keep genetic diversity high. So when a place like this is cleared and lost and becomes inhospitable space where a wood turtle is not going to try to walk through a lawn-like grassy meadow trying to grow in the shade under solar panels, it might as well commit suicide, because there will be vultures and all sorts of common species ready to spot it moving through this habitat across the access road and eat it for lunch. So, by creating this solar field in the middle of this contiguous forest, cutting off access ways between stream corridors, these populations are seriously impacted. And this has been documented for wood turtles. All of the studies on wood turtles, the serious decline they've been going through, they may even move from threatened to endangered, show that fragmentation and blocking of these dispersal routes is a serious problem for them. So we have 11 bear species that are likely to experience significant impacts to the local breeding population. Next, I want to just forestry plan comments on rare species. Northern pine snake. The past and planned forest management activities have sustained potential habitat for this species and will not adversely impact any possible pine snakes. Wood turtle. The forest and riparian habitat found associated with the forest provides habitat for this species. The planned silvicultural activities have and will continue to support habitat suitability for this species. And wood turtle is a threatened species, just like the pine snake in the state of New Jersey. Here's a map, just to give you a refresher. The forestry plan talks about the contiguous area of Cotter's Mills to the south. I don't have to remind this board of your town. I know, we all know that across Reed Road is this massive forest. To the east and to the northeast is the Francis Mills Conservation Area, and we have Prineville Road and Reed Road. They're sand roads. We have the Blackland Bowbenders, that's a conservation easement. That forest is preserved. And we have, again, the Francis Mills Conservation Area. That's Township Park. There's lots of other forests that has yet to be preserved, obviously. Now, gypsy moth damage has killed some canopy oak trees. Those trees are being replaced by natural pine regeneration. That's what the plan says. This dynamism is natural in the forest. There's nothing wrong with a dying tree. You don't look at a dying tree or a tree that's got a crooked shade and say, oh gee, look at that horrible tree, let's get rid of it and plant a nice new little tree somewhere else. That has nothing to do with ecology. That has to do with something akin to when my aunt used to put plastic slip covers on her couch. She might try to make things look neat. Right? But that's nothing to do with ecology or forestry. Right? I can't understand why the trees were ranked in the plan submitted by Great Adventure by the solar applicant as to whether or not they look straight or crooked. I mean, it's a forest. Who cares if the tree is straight or crooked? It makes no difference. The forest provides habitats for thousands of species of animals. It doesn't matter what shape the tree is. Okay, now, the gypsy moths killed oak trees. That's actually a good thing for many species, especially to threaten pine snake. The oak stumps, when those trees die from gypsy moth, they don't resprout. Unlike when a fire burns them, they resprout. When the gypsy moth kills them, the whole tree actually dies. And the stump starts to rot, and those become winter dens for the pine snakes. This site, given that it has a high percentage of oak, and it has a lot of trees that were killed by gypsy moths, has rotting stumps. This site is an upland. It's very dry. The soil goes down deep, and it's dry. And those rotting stumps are passageways that the pine snake can use to get down 4 and 5 and 6 feet, where it is right now, spending the winter on this site. Here is a hole that's about as big as a softball or a grapefruit in the forest floor. That's a rotting root cavity of a tree. And you can see the snout of a pine snake sticking his tongue out. He's in his winter hibernation spot, in his winter den, but it's a warm day, and so he's got his snout up so he can breathe, so he can warm his body with the warm air, 60 degrees on December 29th. This is not on the site, this is near the site in the pine barrens. And he does that because if he can warm his body in December, he can fight off bacterial infections. That's an adult pine snake in his winter den. Here is a baby pine snake, a neonate, just born, just hatched, in September. It's about 10 inches long. You can't see the head, it's under this leaf. And it's going into this large stump hole in the ground. This is looking straight down at the ground, this photo. And there's a neonate pine snake using its winter den. Now you might ask how we can find these things. Well, if your board wanted to know about pine snakes on the Great Adventure site, you could ask the applicant to do a survey. And then they could find out about what the pine snakes are doing there. This is an aerial photograph of the site. These are hypothetical pine snake territories. Now, the applicant testified that pine snakes have very large home ranges. They range a couple of miles during the course of the year. Pine snake territories, I radio track pine snakes. I've been doing radio tracking for 8 years. I've been studying pine snakes since 1991. They have enormous territories. Some of them are up to 4 square miles. Some of them, on average, these 4 territories are just average, middle-of-the-road pine snake territories, ranging from 350 to 1,000 acres. That's not big. That's average. Some pine snake territories are 2,000 acres. Some are almost 3,000 acres. Now, the applicant testified that there were pine snakes within 500 feet of the proposed solar site. 500 feet is this tiny little black line. The proposed solar site is right in this portion of the property. You can see the safari park, and here's the forest of the proposal. 500 feet is nothing to a pine snake. It's absolutely nothing. It's like me going like this. That's what 500 feet is to a pine snake. They can do it in 15 minutes. So, the pine snakes are there. They're hibernating there now. It's indisputable. It's absolutely indisputable. They are there. It's perfect hibernating habitat. There's nesting habitat in sandy areas in the safari park, sandy areas in people's backyards, sandy areas in Conyers Mills, scattered all about the region that is within easy reach of the females who need to find these nesting areas. The males don't even need that. The males just need a hole in the ground in the winter, forest to forage in the summer, and females in the neighborhood. Okay? They're there. If you look for them, you would find them. Had you asked the applicant to look for them, he would have found them. And then you could have made a decision about whether there's going to be an impact to the critical habitat and individuals of this threatened species in New Jersey. You have not been given the information until now. Pine snakes are environmental barometers. They're indicator species. When they disappear, that means the forests are becoming overly fragmented and surrounded by development. When the forests still have corridors going to the south, to the northeast, to wetlands, to uplands, to all different microhabitats, the forest is still connected. This solar proposal will cut this forest in half between Reed Road and Perineville Road. The project site provides everything that the pine snake needs. It probably also provides everything that many of these other special concern species need, but I didn't go into the detail on every species. I'm just, I'm sorry, but I'm only giving you all this information about the most important threatened species on the property, the one that is certainly there, the one that certainly utilizes the site, and the one that's threatened in the state of New Jersey. But your board, in your ordinance, in the Environmental Impact Statement Ordinance 244-189, says that you are to be provided with an assessment of the potential impact to all the rare species. And you haven't been provided that. You should have asked them to do a survey, because the state hasn't asked them to do a survey, because the state has no regulatory law, because it's not in the Pinelands and it's uplands, so it's not covered by the wetlands law. But you have your environmental impact statement and your municipal ordinance, and if you wanted to protect the rare species in your town, you can ask the applicant to give you information so that you can make a decision with the information in front of you. Here's what you could ask them to do. You could ask them to put up drip fences on the site to capture the snakes when they emerge from their dens this March. You could ask them to do radio telemetry of some of the captured snakes to find out where the winter dens are on the site. Then next winter they could put corrals around the winter dens before the springtime, and they could see how many snakes are using these dens. And you could determine if there were incredible numbers of pine snakes or if there were only a few pine snakes. And then you can determine what the appropriate mitigation might be. But you haven't got that data. You don't have it yet. So there's no way you can make an accurate judgment as to what the impacts are and how those impacts could be mitigated or alleviated or avoided if necessary. So I think that's the end of that presentation.